Surprise! Extra reading this week. I'm actually kind of following in Rebecca's footsteps. I don't know if any of you guys have watched Spilling Ink this week, but on Spilling Ink, Rebecca read from her latest and greatest book, and she did such a wonderful job reading that I felt like I wanted to read, even though I know I cannot compare. That woman can definitely do live readings. You'll just have to put up with my flubbing. But I was just inspired that I should read tonight too. Maybe I won't flub as much, but I had nothing else going on tonight. Normally I'm editing, and it's kind of weird to have a night off. And what a better way to fill your time than to read a book, right? So we're actually going to get through a few chapters today. They all kind of go together. So that's one of the reasons I decided to kind of bunch them up this way. And the other reason is because I am dying to read chapter 20. That is one of my favorite chapters. And you can't read chapter 20 until you read the ones before it. So we are going to jump in. Oh, looks like I got a couple people watching already. Rebecca, yay. Thanks for joining me. I loved your reading tonight, by the way. You did so good. Oh, I'm jealous. You read so well. And I am anxious to get to chapter 20 because it's a really, really good chapter. All right. You're here to count for me. Yes, there will be flubs. Let's just, it is what it is. So let's get to it. Chapter 17. All right. Now, if you guys remember, Gray was dropping Sage off in a safe place while he goes with the rest of the agents to take care of what's going on. So here we go. I got a hot mess for you, Rena, Gray called out as he set Sage down on the bench in the cafeteria. A tiny voice responded, sounding distant, but still able to be heard. Sage hadn't met Rena before, though she had heard the name back in Ava's office. Another lackey of the agency. You got this? Gray asked, his voice already trailing away from her. Her eyes puffy with tears, not caring how ugly her crying was, Sage allowed herself to be gawked at by Rena or anyone else in the room. Her whole world had come crumbling down, and as much as she wanted to run screaming from the building, she had yet to gain enough strength in her legs to do it. Nice to meet you, Sage. Rena, a waif of a girl with silvery blue short hair, brought a steaming cup of coffee as she came over. Kind of a shitty way to make a first impression, though, huh? She looked nothing like what Sage would have expected an assistant to stick up her ass, Ava. A full sleeve of entwined tattoo artwork covered Rena's right arm, all the way down to her fingers. A small nose stud glinted in the light as she took the seat next to Sage, setting the tempting cup of steaming liquid energy just within grasp. I mean, I wish I'd met you earlier when Gray brought you in, but you caught me between assignments. Ava keeps me pretty busy. Rena offered a friendly smile as her attempt to start up a conversation turned awkward. I met her once. Your mother? She spoke softly, much more reverently than Gray had. But that did nothing to soothe the raw pain. Sage pressed her lips together tightly as she turned away, knowing that if she opened her mouth, nothing good would escape. Her eyes still burned, but she had exhausted her allotment of tears, and a slow throbbing started to awaken, threatening a full-blown headache if she didn't act quickly. Caffeine was definitely needed now, and the smell of brewing coffee was a welcome scent, almost overpowering the odor of death that was hanging thickly in the air. For what it's worth? I'm sorry. Those bastards deserve to be put down for what they've done to our people. Rena's voice soured, its tone matching Sage's current state of mind. They killed my father, too. A while ago, she clarified. But that's how it goes. The death of a parent conscripts us into a war that we would never know, nor want to be a part of. A never-ending war. Rena was just as much a victim as Sage was. She shared the same pain at some point. Probably felt the echoes of it still. The loss of someone you love was not a thing easily forgotten. I'm sorry you lost your father, Sage offered gently, realizing that someday the cycle would repeat again, should she ever have a child. Until the end of time. Her mother's final goodbye struck hard. Sage had questioned the cryptic tone of her mother's last letter, but now it made a lot of sense. They were doomed to continue the cycle. Sage imagined her own child one day going through the same feeling. No, this cycle would not continue with her. Sage would not have children. I still miss him, but at least I can carry on his work, Rena replied with a half-hearted smile. You're an agent? Sage hadn't meant to sound so rude, but she'd only just been introduced as Ava's assistant. We're all agents first. I'm not very good in a fist fight, but I slay in the boardroom. Rena giggled at her own joke. In her current state of melancholy, though, Sage was humorless. But out of courtesy, she attempted a chuckle when she caught the falter of Rena's friendly smile. I can serve A.S.S.E.T better behind a desk than I can out in the field, Rena said, more seriously this time. The undying paper pusher. We all have our strengths, Sage replied mechanically, still trying to gain control over her emotions. Rena hadn't been the one to put her in this position. She hadn't decapitated her mother. She hadn't lied or manipulated Sage in any way, and didn't deserve to be on the receiving end of her animosity. I'm sorry I'm bad company. You don't have to babysit me. I'm sure there are others who need your care. Oh, don't apologize. Rena reached out and took a hold of Sage's hand. You got a raw deal. When things calm down, I got a bottle of wine we can share. Much good that would do. Ever since Mom died, I can't even get a good... Ever since Mom died, I can't even get drunk or a good buzz. Confusion flashed across Rena's face for a split second before she reined in the expression. Well, that sucks. The awakening affects some people differently, I guess. We'll come up with some way to work with you. Sage dropped her gaze to Rena's hand, still clasped tightly around her own. On her left wrist, she wore a leather cuff, much like the one she'd seen Mark wearing. The leather was dyed blue, but it still bore the symbol of the Tree of Life on it, like a branding. That was the kind of thing she would prefer to wear to cover her deformity. Where do I get one of those? She hadn't meant to ask the question out loud, but the words left her lips before she could stop them. It was a gift from my dad, Rena replied, showing all the angles of the cuff off for Sage to admire. A wide strap of suede leather, stitched with white thread, closed around her wrist with a two-pronged belt buckle. It was perfect and wide enough to cover her mark completely. Sage couldn't even see a hint of the telltale birthmark peeking out from the edges. She pulled the necklace out from under her shirt. My mom gave me this. At least we have something to remember them by. Rena's eyes lit with excitement, and she reached a hand out towards the necklace. Her fingers dangled in the air just shy of the pendant. It's beautiful. She let her hand hover for a moment, as if hesitating to actually touch it, and then turned towards the door as people were beginning to come in. Duty calls. Keep that safe. Rena fell right into place, attending to the wounded that were being brought in. Sage tucked her necklace back under her shirt. Her coffee had long since cooled, sitting untouched on the table next to her, but she gulped it down all the same, needing the boost of caffeine. No one seemed to notice Sage as they passed her. She picked up on conversations and snippets, overhearing details of death counts and the occasional mention of the word darkling. But no one seemed to know why they had been attacked. She had seen so much in the last few days, her whole world had come unglued. Fantasy and reality blended into a nightmare that she couldn't wake from. And at the top of it all was her mother. Darkling, or whatever they called her. Miranda had been there, standing in front of her. Maybe she'd been drugged. Maybe she'd been brainwashed. Those sounded much more plausible than the explanation that A.S.S.E.T had offered. Either way, her mother was gone. And just as Rena had said, the death of a parent had conscripted her into a war she had never known about nor wanted to be a part of. Everything she'd been forced to endure was because of that stupid mark on her arm. Devon had accused her of being passive, of having a victim's mentality. He'd warned her to be strong and fight, and letting herself be told where she was supposed to be and what she was supposed to do was about as passive as it got. Rena met her gaze from across the room. Her smile remained friendly. Sage returned it with determination. This place felt neither safe nor where she belonged, and rather than accept what everyone else wanted for her, it was time that she started to dictate her own destiny. Sage made quick work of gathering her things and changing into her own clothes before heading back to the main lobby elevator. Where are you going? Ava barked at her, just as she'd pressed the button to call up the elevator. Sage's heart jumped. She clenched her fist to steady her nerves and stared straight at the elevator doors, praying that they would open. I expected better of Miranda's daughter. Ava sounded as if she were getting closer, but no clip-clop of footsteps confirmed it. Then you shouldn't have killed her. Sage ground her teeth to hold herself together. She kept her eyes straight, knowing that if she turned around, Ava might find a way to crack her resolve. Haven't been paying much attention then, have you? Pain sharpened Sage's tone. I watched her die. If she were truly immortal, she would have to live with that image of her dead mother for an eternity as a reminder. You watched a creature wearing your mother's skin. Ava's cruel tone cut like a knife. And yes, it was executed. She drove the pain deeper with each sharply edged word. Before it killed you, I might add, you should be thanking Mr. Maddox for saving you. If she never saw Gray again, it would be too soon. How do you face a man who decapitates your mother? No, she wouldn't thank him. She'd punch him in his stupid face. You have all these stories and all these fantasies. Slap a fun name on it and expect people to buy into the mystique? I have my eyes, and I know what I saw. Eyes can be deceived. But I'm not here to tell you what you should believe. You've seen for yourself what fantasies are out there. Fancy names or not, you know the truth. Sage pinched her eyes shut against the burn of tears that should have come, but she'd already spent them earlier. I don't know what truth is anymore. Well, here's the truth for you. Ava cut her off sharply. Outside those doors, you're on your own. No one here will risk themselves to keep you alive, and you can bet your fate will run the same direction as your dearly departed mother. The elevator doors opened. Sage stared into the welcoming space, willing herself to take a step. One foot in front of the other. Leave now before you're dragged back down the rabbit hole. You may have that mark, but it doesn't make you one of us, Ava added. That choice must be yours. Part of her wanted to understand. She had seen more in the last few days than she had ever imagined. Things that blockbuster sci-fi movies were made of. But beyond the special effects, Sage felt in her gut that she was in the wrong place. She walked into the elevator, pressed the button for the basement level, and finally allowed herself to look Ava in the eyes. She expected anger, maybe even hatred. But though Ava's tone had cut her sharply with every word, what she saw in the director's eyes was disappointment. Sorry. Sage let the doors close. Chapter 18. Determination carried her all the way home, but the moment she set eyes on her front door, Sage hesitated. She thought of nothing but the journey, saving no consideration for the destination or what kind of a shitstorm she'd be walking into. There was bound to be questions, and she didn't have a satisfactory answer, even for herself. Matt opened the door before Sage could even get the key into the lock. The hard look on his face confirmed that he'd been waiting, worried. Where the hell have you been? And dressed like that? The look was starting to grow on her. But even she had to admit, disappearing for a few days and then returning wearing assassin's leather and smudged makeup probably added a whole new level of crazy. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Sage feigned a weak smile. First, we're going to discuss your wardrobe. Matt pulled her into a bear hug, squeezing her so tight that she felt she might pop. When he let her go, she could see the worry mixed with strain behind his eyes. Then, you're going to explain why on earth you left me hanging on game night. Damn it! She gasped, reinflating her lungs. Of all the nights to be trapped in Fantasyland. Hard to raid the Dragon's Keep without your entire team, he taunted her with a mixed glare of teasing and anger. Where the hell was my healer? Look, I'd have much rather been here. Trust me, Sage grumbled. She'd lived through the real raid during her time away, and that hadn't gone as well as planned, though thankfully she'd made it out alive. Magic or no, resurrection was not a thing that happened in the real world. At least, she hoped not. Her memory flashed to the image of her mother turned dark, and in a split second the vision shifted to the bloody pool at her feet, and her mother's severed head lying just out of reach. A shiver ran up her spine, and the resulting shudder made Matt look more concerned than he'd had moments before. Beer? He asked, already on his way towards the fridge. That was code for, sit down, we need to talk. It's an unwritten law between them. Delivering bad news always had to come with a drink of some kind, though lately she'd lost the benefit of alcohol's numbing magic. Was the gang mad that I couldn't make it? Sage asked, taking her seat at the table and hoping to steer the conversation away from where she'd just been. Worried, with good reason. Matt set 2 amber bottles down and popped the cap off of each. I know you're going through a lot, and I won't downplay it. I'm sorry. Let me finish. I'm here for you, no matter what, okay? Shoulder to cry on, confidant, unlicensed therapist. You know I have access to all the good meds. He winked in that adorable way that never failed to bring a smile to her face. Oh, if only you took my insurance, she snickered. Although he should have laughed too. Matt's smile faltered, and his expression turned serious. He scrutinized her as he prepared to launch straight into his real point. Speaking of that, I opened your mail. I opened your mail. He slid one of the beer bottles in front of her slowly. Honey, why didn't you tell me you lost your job? She forgot about that and scrambled with how to explain it. That and so many other things had stolen her focus over the last few days. Being laid off by a troll of a boss had kind of been the least of her concern. It was sudden. Marcy. Should she mention the shape-shifting boss and how she'd screamed like a girl? Or maybe how she'd been accosted by a vampire and swept off to a secret agency of magical assassins? She'd sound utterly crazy talking about crap like that, and Matt already thought she'd gone off the deep end. True or not, any explanation she could offer would only confirm her psychosis. Maybe someday she could show him what she learned, but even then, how was she supposed to do that? She was magically neutral, or so she'd been told. Couldn't use it, couldn't be affected by it, so what could she show him? Matt stared at her as she fumbled for words, his jaw set tight, ready to lash out no matter what she said. Life just keeps taking one shit after another on me. Sage sighed, throwing up her hands in defeat. I don't know what else to say. How about sorry, for starters? He practically roared at her. I have expected to find you lying in a ditch. Don't you ever scare me like that again. Tears glistened at the edge of his eyes, but his voice was pure rage. I don't care what's happening. He took a swig of his beer, and Sage recognized the maneuver, covering his face to hide the emotions and maintain the guise of manly aloofness. He chugged the whole thing to give himself enough time to rein that composure back in. And she felt completely deserving of his rage. She hadn't meant to make him worry. She should have called, she should have texted, and given him some reason for her absence. It tugged at her heart to see him fighting to look so strong. He deserved more respect than she'd given him. I'm sorry. Where did you go? He demanded, setting down his now empty bottle. He wore the mask well enough, but behind those watery eyes she saw cracks in his stony exterior. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. No truer words have been spoken, but she knew he'd demand real answers, so before he could follow up, she added a few nuggets of vagueness. I went for a walk. I stayed in a hotel. Look, I was safe enough. I needed to step out of my life for a moment and just see it from the outside, you know? You could have called. You could have texted. I was worried sick, counting down the hours until I could file a missing persons report. A dead phone was the lamest of all excuses, and Sage didn't dare use it. Matt deserved better than that. Phones were everywhere. She could have found some way to get a message to him. She'd thought of it while at A.S.S.E.T, but with all the crazy going on around her, she hadn't made the time to pick up the phone. His anger was more than justified. You're right. No excuses. I was an ass. How do I make this up to you? I'll think of something. He reached across the table and grabbed her untouched beer, claiming it as his own. I mean it. I'm sorry. Look, I'm having a really hard time dealing with Mom's death, and I didn't realize how much it would screw me up. I'm a total jerk. That I believe, he scoffed. You've always been a mama's boy. She hoped a little good-natured ribbing might lighten his mood. Matt set his bottle down and burped loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Proud of it, too. Emotions bottled up like a knot in her throat. He didn't know how lucky he was to have his parents alive and well. living only a few short miles away. Maybe we should go crash Sunday night dinner, he offered, as the silence between them grew stale. Tempting, but Sage didn't think that she could handle it. No matter how good a cook his mother was, it would only rub salt in the wounds. I don't think You said anything. He glared at her over the top of the beer as he was lifting it to his lips. That's not fair. Nora's letting me think you were lying dead in a ditch, he countered. You jumped to conclusions. Well, you left me no reason not to. You're not yourself. You're freaking out at every little thing, and you're hiding things from me. We used to talk about everything. Look, I get losing your mom is hard, but there's something else going on with you, Sage, and for whatever reason, you don't want to tell me. I need help. You're right. I'm screwed up in the head, and when I figure out which way is up, I promise you'll be the first to know, okay? He rolled his eyes. Sure, Sage, whatever. If it means that much, she let out a deep sigh, knowing that she was going to regret this. I'll go to dinner at your parents' house. Great. I'll call them. Let them know to expect us this weekend. Matt's smile looked forced. He stood up and cleared the way, taking both beers and tossing them into the recycling bin as he headed towards his room. Where are you going? She asked, confused with his sudden departure. He'd gotten what he wanted. Why storm off in a tizzy? It's my turn to leave you hanging, Matt's voice echoed slightly, as if reverberating off the walls. But don't worry, I won't stray far. A moment later, she heard the shower. Matt being mad at her ranked right up there with the other tragedies that had happened this week. Telling him about her little revelation would be the right thing to do for their friendship, but short of any tangible proof, what could she say? She needed real answers from someone so she could speak openly to. Sage headed into her bedroom, locked the door, and turned on the television for some background noise. Not sure of how the conversation would go. She didn't need Matt overhearing anything and getting the wrong idea. He was already mad enough as it was. With a reluctant sigh, she picked up the phone and called Mark. Chapter 19, for those of you still following. The phone had barely rung before Mark answered it. I was hoping I'd hear from you. Sage collapsed on the bed, staring at the ceiling, not really sure how to begin. Anger was at war with sadness. He was her last true link to the past, to home. Mark might not have lied outright, but omission was just as bad as a lie, and he had failed to tell her what was happening. He might have saved her from a lot of trouble if he'd convinced her to stay. Anger won the battle, sharpening her voice. Why didn't you tell me when I was in Phoenix? It's quite normal to be skeptical during such a new transition period, Mark said flatly. His usually friendly voice betrayed no emotion. A breaking-in period is often necessary. If you recall, I did extend multiple offers of employment. That was a lie. He'd asked her once. He offered her a place to work, as he always had, but it was hardly more than small talk. Had he really wanted her to stay, he could have given her a reason. And as she found out, in the worst possible way, there were plenty of reasons. Yet, he remained mute. He was being strangely distant, too. Even the tone of his voice was off, lacking personality as he spoke to her like a client. Maybe calling was a bad idea, but she needed answers. She needed truth, understanding of what was real, and how she fit into it all. What am I supposed to do? Sage huffed. You've been contacted by the Las Vegas office, correct? He asked as though he had already had to have known the answer. Gray had told her earlier that he'd been given the file by the Phoenix office in order to locate her. Oh, yeah, they rolled out the welcome wagon for me, Sage countered his neutral tone with snark. Miss Cynwrig. Mark said her name with impatience. That tone was familiar. Mark had pulled ranks on her many times over her youth. Yes? She threw the word back at him. She wasn't his daughter, nor would she allow him to talk to her like that. He'd relinquished that right as far as she was concerned when he failed to reveal the truth to her in person. I'm sorry, he whispered. The sudden shift in his tone made her wonder what was going on his end of the conversation. You're right to be angry at me. I should have sat you down and told you, but... Sage held her breath in anticipation, but Mark left the words hanging in the air. But that's in the past now. He sounded like a man itching to say something, all the while struggling to bite his tongue. Ava's got an excellent team in the Las Vegas office. You'll be well prepared for duties in due course. The cryptic shift in conversation only added to her confusion. What happened to coming to work with you? He'd asked her every chance that he could for her to come work with him. Even before she'd gone off to college, it had always been the family business. Unfortunately, Miss Cynwrig, you're out of my jurisdiction. His answer came back swiftly and cold, as cold as any she'd received from Ava back at A.S.E.T. That wasn't like Mark. What are you not telling me? She demanded. I assure you, they're a top-notch agency with excellent record. You will be well protected there. He had to be speaking some kind of code. She believed he was concerned for her safety, but there was a lie in the delivery. What was he not saying? And I wouldn't be safe with you? As I've already said, you're out of my jurisdiction. Your concerns have been noted, but at this time, you will have to report to Ava Masters, the director of the Las Vegas office. Vegas or bust, eh? She asked, trying to decipher his message, searching for clues in his ambiguous answers. It went against everything she'd known of Mark to push her away when he'd kept her safe for all her life. If he had thought she was better off where she was, then there had to be a good reason for it. Educating yourself is a very good place to start. Perhaps you should take some time to research the Terras and the beginnings of A.S.S.E.T, he suggested. It might help lessen the concerns you're having during this transition period. Aren't you a Terra as well? Of course. His businesslike tone faltered for a moment, and the library within A.S.S.E.T is an excellent resource. Has something happened there? What are you protecting me from? I need truth, Mark. I need answers from someone I can trust. She couldn't hide the desperation in her voice. In the long pause that followed her outburst, she heard her roommate fumbling around in the hallway. She'd have to choose her words carefully, too, from this point on. I heard that the A.S.S.E.T facility in Vegas was hit. Mark dropped his voice to barely a whisper, as if he too were trying to ensure that his words weren't overheard. I'm more relieved than you can know to hear that you're safe. Our facility did not fare well. Don't come back here. Then nowhere's safe, Sage said to herself, remembering the sirens and the dark things pouring in from the elevator. She had never felt so scared in her life. There's no better place for you right now than within their protection, Mark said, loudly as he touted A.S.S.E.T security. Ava's office is known for having skilled agents capable of handling any situation. Is this normal, being attacked at the office? I don't remember Mom ever. No, Mark cut her off with another whisper. We're in the midst of a war with magical factions, the likes of which we haven't seen since the dawn of time. Bad time to be awkward, she replied. It's why you were awakened. These skirmishes are only the start of the devastation that could spread across the globe. Their attacks are targeting the best of our agents. His voice remained low, but she caught the desperation in his tone. Agents with centuries of experience have been mowed down in the field, turned dark, and sent right back after their own people. And when one Terra dies, the next of their line awakens, leaving us with nothing but trainees to protect the world for the battles to come. If this continues, it'll cripple us. You aren't ready. Because no one's trained me, she snapped back at him. If I had been told what my destiny would be, I might have been prepared to fight. Secrecy was screwing the agents of A.S.S.E.T, not newbie Terras being awoken. If they had any sense, they would at the very least train their children. So if they were awoken, that they wouldn't be in this transition period, as Mark called it. The Las Vegas office library has copies of our training manuals for you to peruse. Back to business again. You could benefit from reading The Great Tree, The War of the First Race, and The Mother's Cure. Reading. Got it, Sage grumbled. Still gaining 2 more questions for every answer she got. At least he'd given her someplace to start with the research. Reading she could do, and Devon had already given her some books to start with. Open your eyes as well as your mind, Mark insisted. You see the truth in front of you. Now take your place within the organization. But what do I do about my life here? My friends? Protection is the duty of all asset agents. How am I supposed to do that? By returning to Asset and completing your training. That's not fair. I have a life here. You have a duty that goes beyond what you've already experienced. His cryptic answers were really beginning to grate on her nerves. You know, that's not fair. Seeing Mom and then watching her die. I heard about that. He sighed loudly into the phone. You didn't even bother to tell me the truth about her. I hadn't been given a complete intelligence on that agent's whereabouts. She failed to check in after an assignment. Her last contact reported her missing. We assumed the worst and followed protocol. He lowered his voice again, whispering quietly that she almost couldn't hear him. You wouldn't have been awakened if your mother's light still burned. The fact that you were experiencing the changes and starting to see the world around you is proof of that. So when I came down there, you didn't know for sure? I had it on good authority when I called you, and seeing your mark begin to change prove it. And you still couldn't tell me the truth when I was right there, face to face. I truly didn't want to believe it for myself. For that, I'm sorry. You deserve to hear that from a trusted friend. Instead, I was lied to and manipulated by the person I needed most. You're right to be angry at me, and I hope in time I can earn that trust back. You're like a daughter to me, Sage. I never meant for this to happen, to you or to Miranda. Miranda was the kind of warrior who should have fought for centuries. You should have enjoyed a normal life and married and started your own family. That's what we wanted for you, not this. We never wanted to involve you in this world or its troubles. But now that you've been awakened, you must understand what you are. His sudden shift back to being the company man nearly gave her whiplash, but she understood the need to sound business as usual if there were potentially untrustworthy ears nearby. There are dangerous elements out there, Miss Cynwrig. All Terras must band together now to protect each other and fight for the greater good. Whose good? Peace. No good comes from war. Our people are the bringers of peace. You'll learn that if you read The Mother's Cure. And yet we're warriors, Sage clarified. Peace often doesn't come without some struggle, which is why our people need to be well trained. Has there ever truly been peace? She asked. Yes, he replied a little too swiftly to be believed. And what happened to change that? She hoped if she kept prying, she'd finally get to the bottom of it. Wish I knew, Mark whispered more urgently this time. Darkling armies are a great concern at the moment, especially since they use them to gain access to the facility. And you still think I'm safer there? If what he said was true, then the answer would be no. If Darklings could make it into the asset facilities, then she was no safer there than on the streets. Asset has resources to protect its people, and the magical archives held within. He proudly boasted, and the sudden shift in volume had her pulling the phone away from her ear. She was ready with a snarky retort to what seemed like another one of his vague replies, but she caught the fact that he had volunteered the words magical archive and held her tongue. Mark paused long enough to justify his next statement as a reply to her unasked questions. Things that might be dangerous for other magical creatures to use have always been held safe within the hands of our people. Because we're peacekeepers? She asked. Who better to store and protect the most sensitive of magical artifacts than those who are immune to magic? She lost the train of thought, realizing that he was pointing her to an answer, but not exactly sure what the right question was to get the directions clear. The Great Tree is an excellent read, if you're looking for a basis in our history. The Mother's Cure as well. Those two books will help you clarify your place in Asset, he finished. Okay, then. She'd asked for truth, and what she'd gotten was homework. Though vague, he had given her a few important clues on what to research, and possibly what was in the magical archives that would be worth sending in an army of Darklings to retrieve. Shall I alert Ava of your return, then? He sounded hopeful. Don't worry about me, Mark. I'll be safe. She ended the call. Chapter 20 is coming up. Yay! I get to read that one next. So, did you guys enjoy that? Was that fun? Did I flub too many times? I can't wait to read chapter 20. There is some really, really, really good banter in chapter 20. And I love chapters where I get characters who can be snarky to each other and who can speak quickly, and the conversation is really good. So I'm excited for that. However, in that last chapter, Mark was definitely giving her clues. And Rebecca, I know you've read it before, so you know what the clues are. But Sage is going to have to do some reading, and hopefully she will get the answers she's been dying to get and figure out what's going to be needed to move on. I don't want to give away too many spoilers. All right, so that was chapter 17, 18, and 19, which they all kind of went together. So it really, we're at 36 minutes recorded now. So really it wasn't that long to read those three. Chapter 20 is a bit long, and I will be reading that one as usual. So tomorrow you'll get that chapter from me. And thank you guys again. I love knowing that you're out there listening while I read. It makes me excited to read. And I love being able to share these works with you. So thank you so much for watching. And I will see you guys tomorrow for chapter 20. I can't wait. Bye, guys.